Okay, so you sent us some really quite staggering material this week. It gets into these incredibly disturbing claims about something called Monarch mind control programming.
Yeah, it's it's heavy stuff.
Right.
We're talking about the alleged deliberate traumatization of children, like scientifically planned trauma.
Right, with the specific goal, according to this source, chapter02.pdf you shared, of creating separate personalities. Alters, they call them.
And these alters are supposedly walled off by amnesia, complete memory barriers between them.
It honestly sounds like something out of the darkest fiction, but this document presents it as, well, as something real.
It does. And our aim here, just to be clear, is to really dig into the methodologies described in your source, the why behind it, according to them.
Exactly. This deep dive is focused solely on unpacking chapter02.pdf. We want to understand the techniques, the supposed logic, twisted as it is, and the effects described within this document.
And I'm here to help navigate that. It's complex, deeply unsettling information.
Definitely. Okay, let's start at the core concept, which seems to be trauma. Not just trauma, but strategic, purposeful trauma.
That's precisely how the source frames it. Every act of torture, every traumatic event described, supposedly has a specific function.
A function in what? Creating the alters? Maintaining them?
Both, apparently. Creating the initial split and then reinforcing those divisions, keeping the alters separate and functional for their intended purpose. It's described as chillingly systematic.
And the source makes this, frankly, a horrifying connection to Nazi concentration camp experiments, claiming that research was about human tolerance for trauma.
For mind control.
Yeah.
Yes, the source explicitly states that. It draws a direct, disturbing line.
It paints this picture of a scientific approach, doesn't it? Lab coats, heart monitors.
Political detachment, yeah.
Yeah.
Observing a child's reactions, like noting when they assume a fetal position as a sign they've, quote, given up the will to live, is presented as cold, calculated observation during horrific abuse.
And then there's the claim about parents, specifically in the eastern U.S., being taken to Harvard, to be trained in inflicting trauma.
Allegedly, yes. Trained to administer calculated trauma at home before the children even return from supposed initial programming elsewhere. It suggests a multi-layered approach.
Followed by the idea of daily traumas just to maintain the dissociation. It sounds like constant, relentless pressure to keep the mind fractured.
That seems to be the core principle described. Constant reinforcement to prevent integration, to keep those amnesia walls strong.
Okay, so the source then zeroes in on a specific place. China Lake, California, not OOSH, Naval Weapons Center, NWC, it's had different names.
Right, identified as a key initial programming site, particularly for children from the western U.S. The source even mentions Nimitz Hospital's address code in connection with it.
And the justification, according to the source, for why there.
The claim is the base was set up to test new weapons. And these mind-controlled individuals, they were considered the weapon.
That's a chilling way to frame it. And the descriptions of what supposedly happened inside the airplane hangars.
Huge hangars, yes.
Yeah.
Allegedly filled with thousands of these small electrified cages. Woodpecker grids, they're called in the text.
For infant programming, using electric shocks.
That's the claim. Infants, subjected to shocks in these grids. The source says the high voltage created a flash of light.
And that flash was used hypnotically.
Apparently. Linked to hypnotic suggestions, creating a false sense of entering another reality. They called it riding the light, tied into Peter Pan programming themes.
God, it's vile. And then after the cages.
The source states rape followed. Deliberately brutal rape as another layer of intense trauma right after the electric shock.
Just layer upon layer to break them down completely.
That seems to be the described methodology. It also mentions civilian experts, supposedly tied to the Illuminati, being involved. Even a connection to Caltech in Pasadena for research.
So a network beyond just the military, allegedly.
That's what the source suggests, yes.
Yeah.
A collaboration.
Then it moves into color programming. Red and green.
Red and green are highlighted as key, and the use of flashing lights generally to trigger dissociation.
And this is where that really wild claim comes in that the CIA introduced flashing lights into popular culture, bars, concerts.
Yeah, that's a pretty far-reaching accusation in the source, the idea being that these lights could act as environmental triggers for people programmed this way, make them susceptible.
The logistics for all this, transporting children, it must have been huge if true.
The source tries to detail that. It talks about a network, trains, planes, private cars, mentions specific places too.
Like that airstrip in Oregon. Sheridan?
Right, a former private airstrip there, a lumber mill used for housing, neighbors allegedly paid off, also a Catholic monastery mentioned nearby, and the Union train station in Portland.
With tunnels.
Alleged underground tunnels for temporary warehousing. It paints a picture of a covert system.
And where did the children supposedly come from? This is just awful.
The sources listed are heartbreaking. Catholic adoption agencies, pregnant nuns, parents from poorer countries, even parents selling their own children.
And that group, the Finders, CIFBI.
Alleged to be a joint group procuring children. The source even claims some are for sacrifices. Just horrific allegations.
Then there's Santa Rosa, the FEMA airstrip.
Yes, the Santa Rosa Air Center. Unusual night flights allegedly linked to transport to China Lake, and its proximity to Bohemian Grove is noted.
Where Monarch slaves were supposedly abused.
That's the claim made in the source, yes, that the airstrip facilitated transport for abuse at the Grove. Detailing these airfields is meant to show the transport network's existence.
So inside China Lake itself, what else does the source describe?
It mentions the triangular airfield layout, activity mostly in the early morning, different entry points for the children.
And the schools on base, a cover story.
Presented that way, yes, to explain the presence of children if seen. But then you get these recounted memories.
Like the one from the male victim, the hangar again.
Yeah, a large hangar, cages hanging from the ceiling this time. Someone dressed as a Catholic priest, the sound of humming electricity, and a marble altar.
With alleged sacrifices.
That's the memory recounted in the source. It also links Charles Manson's supposed initial programming to China Lake and mentions other nearby sites.
And that 1950s programming center description.
Very specific details: flat roof, tan building, fence, a reception desk, tunnels connecting rooms, and a white programming room.
With chimps. Caged chimps.
Yes, caged chimps and a metal examining table. It's a very stark, disturbing image.
And the methods there. Lights and shocks again.
Patterns of light, low-level shocks, but coordinated with phrases.
Let's step into the darkness, or as the Luciferians spellcast, understand.
All rise.
Let's turn the key of the kingdom. Keep one eye on Sagittarius.
Love me not. Good girls ride the silvery wings, all to condition trance states linked to the electroshock experience.
It sounds like psychological torture refined to a terrifying degree.
That's certainly how it's presented, twisting conditioning techniques.
The source names too. Post-WWII scientists.
Alleged German and British scientists and programmers at Nazis. Mengele is named Dr. Green or Greenbaum, also a Dr. Black. Dr. White identified as possibly Ewan Cameron, and a Dr. Blue.
And the Illuminati hierarchy. Grandmothers, granddames.
Yes, a supposed chain of command overseeing the programming work. It describes a structured, hierarchical system.
Like the programming goals being like IEPs. Individualized education programs.
That comparison is made, yes.
Yeah.
6-month goals, assessing strengths, weaknesses.
To decide their future role. Aggressive kids become generals. Gentle ones become nurses or teachers involved in programming.
That's the disturbing logic presented, channeling traits into predetermined roles within their system. And that detail about many survivors reportedly having parents who are religious leaders. It's unsettling.
And given the torture levels, they had to monitor vital signs.
The source notes that was necessary for certain procedures, yeah. It highlights how dangerous and potentially lethal this all was.
Which leads directly to the effects, PTSD, obviously.
Absolutely. Flashbacks, avoidance, panic, feeling shattered, developing negative worldviews, phobias. These are expected outcomes of such extreme trauma.
But the source says it's different for Monarch victims. The PTSD is masked.
Masked by the DID, yes, and the programming itself. They allegedly create functional front alters who seem okay, interact with the world.
While the traumatized parts are hidden deep inside.
Exactly. And things like self-punishment or withdrawal, which can be trauma responses, are supposedly amplified and deliberately programmed into the alter system.
So the bad memories are actually used to maintain control.
Used to maintain the dissociation, the programming, keep the person compliant. It's described as a self-perpetuating internal prison.
The source mentions Maslow's hierarchy, keeping them from safety.
Yeah, alleging programmers intentionally work to keep victims feeling unsafe, both externally and internally.
Through monitoring systems, reporting alters.
And internal reporting alters, yes, allegedly with 1-800 numbers back to the network. And suicide programming as an ultimate control. It makes therapy incredibly difficult, the source argues.
Because they still aren't safe, even in therapy.
That's the claim. Ongoing interference, ongoing lack of safety. which is why the term survivor is questioned in the text.
And programmers can just shatter altars, create new ones.
Allegedly, yes. And victims can be programmed to abuse themselves using their own alters and specific memory codes or triggers. It's total internal control. The complexity described is immense. Multiple personality systems are inherently complex, but this adds layers of deliberate external structuring.
The source gets into the brain itself then, its complexity.
Right, emphasizing the vastness of our neural network, and claiming a monarch brain is even more active, juggling alters and hemispheres.
And the hidden observer, a deep awareness.
It introduces that concept, but immediately twists it. Claims there's a demonic entity using that name, working with the programmer.
Whoa, okay, that's a significant injection of the supernatural.
It is. The source often blends psychological claims with occult or demonic elements. It also says programmers set up false cores and protectors, hiding the real core self.
How do they allegedly start the splitting process, exploiting natural fears?
That's the claim. Using genetically predisposed fears, snakes, spiders putting a child in a box with them to cause the initial fragmentation.
And telling them to play dead.
Yes, allegedly to instill dissociation. This isn't happening to me. And lay the groundwork for suicide programming later on.
It's not just physical trauma either, is it?
No, the source lists emotional and spiritual trauma too. Things like blood orgies, medieval torture devices, staged events with actors playing authority figures, near-drowning experiences.
And the trained animals. Chimps at Nazis, Mengelay's dogs.
Yes, specific disturbing claims about trained animals used sadistically, chimpanzees with specific roles, Mengele using German shepherds, and involvement in horrific birth-related traumas.
Just relentless wire restraints and rituals, recruiting sadists.
The source claims sadists were specifically recruited. It even cites studies suggesting males can be taught sadism. And then the Mothers of Darkness alters as a supposed counterweight to male programmers becoming too sadistic.
A kind of internal regulation within the horror.
That seems to be the implication. Other tortures listed include sensory deprivation, forced labor, poisoning, rape, controlling basic bodily functions.
And specific tortures for specific goals, tongue cutting for silence.
Exactly. Induced vomiting for eating disorders, dislocating shoulders to make dissociation easier, instant torture for crying. It's presented as brutal conditioning.
The Black Mass around age 3.
Mentioned as a foundation for dark side programming, and then traumas designed to leave no marks.
Like holding arms out, tickling, saltwater tanks.
Yes, sensory deprivation tanks with motion sensors, being put in burial caskets with insects, things causing immense fear but no visible injury.
Making it deniable, untraceable.
Precisely. The Monarch butterfly programming itself is described graphically. Forced leg spreading, rape, associated terms like honeycomb, hallelujah.
And punishments like fishhooks, genital mutilation.
For not learning correctly. Absolute dominance and terror.
This would absolutely destroy trust in other people.
The source says that's a key outcome, compounded by programming to isolate the victim. Then there are environmental traumas, water, caves, sand.
Being lowered into pits. Black holes.
Described as a frequent trauma. The source also mentions the Illuminati's supposed historical emphasis on water torture.
Get specific medical traumas.
Starvation, water deprivation leading to hallucinations, forced exercise and sleep deprivation apparently to induce endorphin release and robotic states, and inverted sustension.
Linked to Mengele again. And reversing pain pleasure.
Yes, the claim is inverted suspension, allegedly experimented with by Mengele, could lead to beta alters perceiving pain as pleasure, creating S&M kitten alters who believe pain is love.
That's profoundly disturbing manipulation.
It is. Then there's porcelain face programming, wax masks, fire torture.
To implant a new mask personality, hiding abuse memory.
Allegedly used by charismatic satanic networks, yes. Hypnotically implanting a new face, a new persona. Ritual trauma on birthdays is mentioned as especially damaging due to repetition.
And sexual abuse in rituals being amplified by the context. Demonic magic.
Creating a false sense of obligation, making the abuse seem like part of something powerful and inescapable.
Cosmetic trauma, too. Implants, removing moles.
Yes, and stage tricks, like multi-needle devices to create scars on command, like the goat of Mende's head activated hypnotically.
So the mind splits as a defense, like a soldier dissociating.
That's the analogy used. This isn't happening to me, walling off the trauma. But the programmers allegedly direct this natural defense.
They decide what the new part will be. 12 white fluffy kittens.
That's the example given, yes. They allegedly dictate the alter's form and function. using truth serum to check, consulting the demonic hidden observer.
There's that supernatural element again.
It weaves through the narrative. An alternative model is also presented, though,
Not a full split, but memory sections.
dividing personal memory with amnesia walls. Each trauma memory gets sectioned off, given cues, names, jobs. But skills, talents, generally accessible to all alters in the system.
Memory storage linked to brain state, hormones.
Right? Like adrenaline during trauma, affecting how memories are encoded. But an alter might be blocked from using a skill if it conflicts with their programming, like a non-sexual alter in intimacy.
And maintaining it requires trance logic.
Constant reinterpretation to make the conflicting internal realities seem coherent. The source mentions Oren's concept of trance logic, briefly touches on Brodmann areas 912 for personality, the reticular formation for consciousness.
Saying the programming controls emotional links, not damages the brain areas directly.
That seems to be the idea. Memories are nested behind amnesia walls, altered states. Electroshock scrambles filing, fragmenting memories across alters.
So you need multiple alters to piece together one event.
That's the claim. And memory retrieval is best in the original trauma environment. Body memory is storing trauma in sensory motor ways.
And false memory syndrome is dismissed.
As CIA damage control, according to the source, the core is seen as the intact original self, the synthesizing self that tries to manage internal conflicts.
But programmers guide alter formation for their needs, not just the victim's adaptation.
Exactly. It's directed development. The source even claims the brain physically grows differently in multiples, with different EEG profiles for alters.
Hippocampus, frontal cortex for event memory, neocortex for general knowledge.
Standard neuroscience concepts applied here. The source stresses the brain's vast memory capacity, but says hypnosis can simply label memories as forgotten. Slaves are under constant suggestion to forget, but the brain secretly records.
It's an incredibly detailed model of alleged control. Then, anchoring.
Crucial concept. All programming anchored to trauma. A foundational trauma watched, filmed, coded.
Like father-daughter incest for beta programming.
Given as a key example, incest allegedly used a standard for Mariah's slaves to sever the core, create that anchor. Mentions Rothschild demanding incest in the family.
And that bond is the hardest to break.
In alleged Illuminati slaves, yes. The incestuous father bond. This anchor isn't some beast computer, it's a core traumatic memory.
And bringing thousands of alters out at once for reprogramming.
Suggested as a way to work faster, using shared anchors and imagery.
Then smells. Olfactory trauma.
Linking blood and perhuman magic. Creating ritual smells to trigger trance or dissociation.
Like burning flesh at ritual.
Alleged common smell, causing dissociation. Mentions historical notes on scents, cinnamon in deeper programming, the smell of waste for caged children, and alpha in urine as a sexual trigger.
Using every sense.
Apparently. Mariah's knowledge of scents, perfumes, and astral magic. It suggests a comprehensive sensory approach.
What about failed moonchild traumas? Autism.
A very speculative claim in the source. Suggests trauma in utero sometimes leads to autism as a mental retreat, a failed mind control outcome.
Yeah.
Links it to genetics, high IQ.
Says autistic children were discarded.
Until about 20 years prior to the source writing, yes. References Donna Williams' work, suggesting autism might involve acute sensory perception, making them unsuitable duds.
But acknowledges multiple causes for autism.
It does. But the authors state their belief is that the rise in autism is linked to increased trauma-based mind control. Also suggests MS as a possible side effect from brainstem scarring. Highly controversial claims. Very much so. Not mainstream scientific views.
Then a quick mention of a ritual device. Wood. Spider symbol.
Yes, a specific description. Made of special wood, maybe myrtle, painted spider, between satanic symbols.
And a summary of splitting. Personality elements stripped. Programmers assign new ones.
Right. Reiteration that memory is divided, but other brain parts function. Monarch control combines observed phenomena dissociation, denial refined into control methods.
Finally, the rituals themselves. Illuminati rituals based on mystery religions.
That's the claim. Rothschilds favoring Canaanite, others Druidic, while noting Druids historically became Christian. Then includes imagery from the Papyrus of Kina.
Egyptian gods. Anubis, Osiris,
Yeah.
Isis.
Yes, depictions from an ancient Egyptian text included, seemingly to provide historical context for ritual traditions, without directly linking those specific images to modern practices described earlier.
Wow, okay. that was a lot. An incredibly intense dive into chapter 02.pdf.
It really is profoundly disturbing material.
Key takeaways seem to be this alleged systematic, almost scientific application of trauma, the goal of creating controllable alters via dissociation, fundamentally erasing identity.
And what's striking, I think, is the internal logic presented by the source. However horrific, it attempts to lay out a coherent system where every piece, every trauma supposedly has a purpose. Analyzing that claimed logic is key.
It definitely leaves you thinking. The potential scale mentioned, the difficulty of ever identifying this, if it were real, the long-term impact. It's overwhelming to consider based on this source.
It forces you to confront some very dark possibilities about control, trauma, and the human mind's limits. Even setting aside the specific claims, it makes you ponder the nature of extreme abuse and resilience.
A final thought for you, the listener, to maybe chew on after hearing all this from the source. If systems of control can allegedly become this sophisticated, this insidious, what does that imply about recognizing subtler forms of manipulation in the world around us? Where does extreme control shade into more common forms of influence? Something to think about.